Welcome to day 3 of my 14-day SAT prep series. In today's video, I'm going to go through some math problems that are from the SAT Practice Test 10 Math Without Calculator section and the Math with Calculator section. These are going to be some of the easier to mid-difficulty problems, and then tomorrow we'll get into some of the harder math problems. And then after I go through these problems, I'm also going to give some tips and tricks from my SAT Math Tips and Tricks videos that are more common to the SAT Math section, so the tips and tricks that you really want to make sure that you know and have down before you take the SAT, because they're common and can save you a lot of time and get you to the correct answer very efficiently. And then after that math prep, we'll go ahead and get into some prep for the SAT writing section as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with today's video. So make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And with that, we're going to get into question 1 from the Math Without Calculator section of SAT Practice Test 10. So this is the Math Without Calculator section. All right, so question 1. As I go through these questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to approach it similar to how I would if I were taking the SAT. Obviously, I'm going to be going slower and giving you answer explanations, but I'm going to try to show you the things that I would look for as I take the test. So I'll try to give you the fastest and most efficient way to get to the correct answer and try to give you some tips and notes you could put down on your way as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with number 1. So what value of z satisfies the equation above? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get all my z's on one side since I only have one variable. So I'm going to subtract z here. That way I keep z positive. Also, I'm asked for the value of z, so by subtracting z from each side, I'm actually going to end with z, because 2z minus z gives me z. At that point, I just subtract 1 from each side, and that's going to give me z equals -1. Thus, I solve right away. Right, so my answer there would obviously be B. Okay, so in this situation, I chose to subtract z from each side because I knew I would then end with z, which is what I'm asked to answer with. If you ever can do that and get what you want to end your answer with right away, that's going to be the best thing to do there. All right, next up, let's take a look at number 2. So we have a television with a price of $300 is to be purchased with an initial payment of $60 and weekly payments of $30. Which of the following equations can be used to represent the number or find the number of weekly payments required to purchase or complete the purchase, assuming there are no taxes or fees? All right, so my total price is $300. I have an initial payment I make of $60, and then I'm paying an additional $30 per week. So that's going to be my equation there. All right, so I just find which one matches that, and I see that's going to be answer choice C. So C would be my answer there. So the big thing there is just notice how I underlined my key variables as I went through the problem. That's going to help me save time because I don't have to go back and look for them. Another thing you could have done is you could have wrote this equation out as you read. That's something I also recommend doing. In this case, I underlined the variables and then at the end wrote the equation. That's fine as well, as long as it's a short problem and you can easily remember what the variables represent. So that's the big thing for number 2. All right, let's take a look at number 3. So we got shipping charges. We have merchandise weight and shipping charge. The table above shows shipping charges for an online retailer that sells sporting goods. There's a linear relationship between the shipping charge and the weight of the merchandise. Which function can be used to determine the total shipping charge f of x in dollars for an order with a merchandise weight of x pounds? All right, so the first thing that I see is obviously I'm answering with an equation of what f of x is equal to. Now, if I take a look at my table, I see I have a 5 here and a 10 here. Right, so if I go up by 5, I see that I go up by right around $5, right? I go up by right around $5. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to find my intercept, because I know if I find my intercept, I can go ahead and get rid of, if my intercept is at 0, then I can get rid of B and D, and if it's at a non-zero, then I can get rid of A and C. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. If I were to go back by 5 from 5 as my merchandise weight to a merchandise weight of 0, that's going to give me my intercept, so I would have to go then back by 5 here. So then I'm going back 5, and I see my answer there would be something right around 11.89 or 99. So I see then my answer can't be A or C because I am going to have an intercept, and I see it can't be D either because I got to go back from 16.94 back to 11.99. So my answer there would be B. Okay, so the big thing that you should understand for this one as far as how to save time with this is just understand on the math without calculator section and sometimes with the math with calculator section, you can get to that correct answer just by picking out one variable and solving for it. Notice I never had to solve for my slope there, and I'm not going to solve for my slope because it's not going to get me any more points. I already know the answer is going to be B, so I just move on. All right, next up, number 4. The line in the xy plane above represents the relationship between the height h of x and feet in the base diameter x for cylindrical Doric columns in ancient Greek architecture. How much greater is the height of a Doric column that has a base diameter of 5 feet than the height of a Doric column that has a base diameter of 7 feet? So I need the difference between my height at 5 feet versus my height at 2 feet, right, where x is 5 versus x is 2. I see that difference is going to be 35, since 35 is when x is 5, right? We go up from 5. And then we have minus 14 to get that difference. Since we go up from 2 and we go over to our left, we see we have 14. So our answer there is going to be 21, because 35 minus 14 is 21 feet. Alright, so that one right there, also not too bad. One tip I do have when dealing with graphs is make sure you draw lines up from your x-axis or up from your, or over to the right from your y-axis. Always follow those lines, because if you're just using your eyes, sometimes you'll look at the wrong line and then you'll end up getting the problem wrong, even though you knew how to do it, just because you weren't paying attention or your vision wasn't great. My vision's not great. So just make sure that you draw lines up and make sure that you're drawing those lines on your graph to avoid an easy mistake. All right, number 5. If x is greater than 0, so that just tells me x has to be positive. That's all it's saying. Which of the following is equivalent to the given expression? Okay, first thing that jumps out to me right away is I have the square root of 9. I know the square root of 9 is 3. Next thing I see is I have x squared. Square root of anything with x squared is just going to be x, right? Because that square root takes away my squared. So now I'm just going to be left with 3x. So my answer there would be A. So that one right there, not too simple, not too difficult. Just make sure that you understand square roots and squares and things like that, right? And another way that you could look at this as well is you could just look at it as that is equal to the square root of 3 squared. Since 3 squared is 9 times x squared, obviously then that square root and your squareds are going to go away and you're left with 3x. All right, number 6. What are all the values of x that satisfy the equation above? Okay, a couple ways that you could do this one. First thing that jumps out to me right away though, and that I want to make sure that you understand, is that if you have something like x minus 1 in your denominator, and you see that it doesn't equal 0, then you already know that if you were to put 1 in for x, you'd have 1 minus 1, which is 0, and if 0 is in your denominator, it doesn't matter what's in the numerator, it would have to equal 0. So right away I know that 1 cannot be my correct answer. So I can go ahead and get rid of C. That's just something I see right away. Anytime I see I have an x minus 1 or an x plus 1 or anything like that in my denominator, I'm always looking to set it equal to 0 to figure out what x cannot equal, right? So I would just take my denominator, set it equal to 0, and then I see that x can't equal 1, right? X cannot equal 1. All right, so if I know x can't equal 1, I know C's wrong. Next thing that I'm gonna look at, you have a couple ways you could do this one, and there's pretty much 2 ways I would recommend or be okay with you doing it. One way is when I see I have a -3 here and a -3 here, if you wanted to, you could plug that one in. I'm okay with doing it in this case. Normally I don't like just plugging and chugging numbers because I think it's waste time. But in this case, I'm okay with it just because immediately you saw you could get rid of 1, and then you see that with that -3, if it turns out that doesn't work, then you get to the answer choice B right away. So because it has both of those with -3 in this case, I'd be okay with someone if they wanted to just plug in -3 and check it. I wouldn't necessarily be a big fan of it, but I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it either. Okay, but the other way that you're going to solve this is just to multiply each side by x minus 1, and this is probably the way I would do it. So I just multiply each side by x minus 1. Obviously, it's going to cancel on that side. And then on my right side, I got x minus 1, 2 times, -2 times x, and then -2 times -1. That's going to give me -2x, and then plus 2. That's obviously going to be set equal to x squared minus 1. At this point, we want to get all of our variables on one side and set it equal to 0. So we're going to add 2x to each side and subtract 2 from each side. So we're going to have x squared plus 2x. Okay, and then we got minus 2 here, right? -1 minus 2 is going to give us -3. We set that equal to 0. Now we're just going to factor it. So factoring this out, we're going to end up with x. We're going to have a plus 3 and then x minus 1. Okay, so that's going to give us x equals -3 and x equals positive 1. Now we already know that positive 1 cannot be a correct answer because we know that from our denominator when we set it equal to 0 we determined x can't equal 1. So therefore I know 1 can't be an answer. Now -3, it can be an answer. So I can go ahead and get rid of b because 0 was not even a possible solution here. And then as far as -1, that is obviously also not a solution. So my correct answer there is going to have to be A. Okay, if you're just wondering how I got x equals -3 and x equals 1 from this right here, I'll put it in blue so you can see it better. From x plus 3 and this x minus 1, that's just because you set those equal to 0. So you would just take x plus 3, set it equal to 0, subtract 3 from each side, get x equals -3. You would take x minus 1, set it equal to 0, and you would get x equals 1. Okay, so that's just how I got those ones. But 6 answer there is going to be A. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at number 7 now. So we've got a graph of f of x shown in the xy plane. What's the value of f of 0? Once again, we have a graph here. You're going to want to make sure that you're drawing lines to make sure you're looking at the right part of the graph. We're asked for the value of f of 0. If you have f of 0, that just means that you're looking at what your y value is when x is 0, right? This 0 right here is just telling you your x term. So we find that term, that 0, draw a line up to it, and I'll put it in blue so you can see it better. Okay, we draw this line up from 0 to where we intersect, and we see we intersect at 4. So our answer there is going to be 4, which is answer choice D. All right, moving on. We got question number 8. All right, this one's pretty interesting, at least in my opinion. We've got a figure above, point B lies on AD. What's the value of 3x? All right, big thing here. we want to add all these x values up. Okay, so we see obviously that this is going to be a 90-degree angle because we have a 90-degree angle here, and we have a line going from A to D. That's a line, right? So on a line, the angle's going to add up to 180. So 180 minus 90, obviously the other side has to be a 90 degrees. Okay, so we know then that 90 degrees, that 90-degree angle, has to equal this x plus 2x plus 2x again, which is going to add up to 5x. Okay, so we just divide each side by 5. That's going to give us 18 is equal to x, or 18 degrees is equal to x, right? Now we're asked for the value of 3x. Okay, now this is a big thing with the SAT math section. You always need to pay attention to what you're asked to answer with. A lot of people right here would just put 18 as their answer, but that's wrong. Okay, so this is a big thing that you want to watch out for. I'm going to put a red flag by it because it's that important. Anytime that you're answering a question like this, or anytime you're answering a question, period, anytime you are answering a question on the SAT math section, you need to make sure that you're looking at the end. The end part of the question is what's going to trick a lot of people and where they can get you to lose points. You want to look at what you're asked to answer with. In this case, it is 3x. It is not just x. You have to multiply that x by 3. So you got to do 18 times 3, and that's going to give you 54. So your answer there is going to be C. Okay, so you always got to pay attention to what you're asked to answer with. All right, question 9. Which of the following is an equation of the line in the xy plane above? Okay, so generally you'd be looking at this line and you just think, oh, I want to put it in y equals mx plus b. Now, you are going to want to put it in y equals mx plus b, but it does not give you an answer choice that has that, right? You're given it in the opposite or a different form than y equals mx plus b. So you got a couple options. For most people, I think what the best thing to do is, since most people are much more comfortable with y equals mx plus b, is just to try to convert the answer choices to that. Now, the first thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at my answer choices where I already have y positive and I just got to subtract x. Because I know I have a negative slope, right? My slope is going to be negative x because I'm going down by 1 for every one I rise and every one I go over, right? It's down. So I know I have to have a negative slope, and it's got to be of -1. Next thing I see, I've got a y-intercept of -4. So right away, I see I have a y here, and I'm talking about answer choice C. I'll put it in blue so you can see better. I've got a y in answer choice C. That's positive, and I've already got a -4. So I see if I subtract x from each side, I'm going to have y equals -x minus 4. So that gives me my y-intercept at -4. Also gives me my negative slope. C would be my answer there. So as far as why I identified C to start with, it was a couple reasons. First thing, I saw I had a positive y, so all I had to do was subtract my x. Okay, so that makes it easier because I don't have to divide each side by a negative like I would in A and B. So that's why I started there first. The reason I started with C first is because I saw I already had that -4. All right, so C is going to be our correct answer for that one. So that's question 9. All right, let's go ahead and move on to question 10. Okay, we're going to switch to the math with calculator section here pretty soon. I think after 10 we will. And we'll go through a couple on that. Then you'll see some of the tips and tricks that are for questions that are fairly common on the SAT math section that I really want you to know and have down. And then after those tips and tricks, we'll switch over to the SAT writing section. All right, so we've got a graph here of y equals 2x squared plus 10x plus 12. If the graph crosses the y-axis at the point 0k, what is the value of k? Okay, big thing I'm looking at here is they're giving me a 0 point. That's really nice and beneficial. So since x is 0, all I got to do is plug in 0. Okay, plug in 0 for x, find what y equals. That's what the value of k will be. Once again, make sure you're paying attention to what you're asked to answer with at the end. Because if it was the value of 3k, you'd have to multiply k by 3. In this case, it's just the value of k. All right, so I'm going to plug a 0 in for x. Okay, 0 squared is going to give me 0. 0 times 2 is going to give me 0. So I can go and get rid of that, put a 0. Plus 10 times 0, once again giving me 0. So 0 plus 0, and then plus 12, which will ultimately give me 12. My answer is the value of k, which is just 12. So my answer for 10 is D. All right, at this point, let's go ahead and move on over to the math with calculator section. We'll answer some of those harder math with calculator section or math without calculator questions tomorrow, as well as some of the harder math with calculator questions tomorrow. Today we're doing more of the easy to moderate level or moderate difficulty math questions. All right, so let's go down here, take a look. Okay, first question for the math with calculator section. We've got a helicopter initially hovering 40 feet above the ground begins to gain altitude at a rate of 21 feet per second. Which of the following functions represents the helicopter's altitude above the ground y in feet, t seconds after the helicopter begins to gain altitude? All right, well, we know we have an initial height or an initial altitude of 40 feet. We know that we are increasing by 21 feet per second, which is t, and we know that that's going to equal our height y. So our answer there would be y equals 40 plus 21 t. Okay, so I've got 40 plus 21 t. I see my answer for that is going to be B then. All right, let's take a look at question 2. As far as tips for number 1, that one's really just slope-intercept form of an equation, making sure you're underlining your variables as you read through. You always want to underline your variables as you read through because it's going to save you time because you don't have to go back and search for them. You can also write your equation as you read through as well. That's another thing that I do sometimes. Sometimes I underline it only. Sometimes I'll underline my variables and I'll write my equation at the same time as I read through. All right, a text messaging plan charges a flat fee of $5 per month for up to 100 text messages sent, plus $0.25 for every additional text message sent that month. Which of the following represents the cost Y of sending X text in a month? Okay, well, our initial fee is $5, so that means we have to have an intercept at 5. Let's make sure all of ours do. We see that they do. Next thing we know is that allows us up to 100 text messages before any fees are added on top of that. So we need to have a flat line from 5, right? So we need to have 5, and we have to have a flat line for at least a while, up to 100. I see I don't have a flat line up to 100 in C and D, so those are wrong. Next, I look at A and B. I have it going down in D and going up in A. We know that the cost isn't going to go down, it's going to go up, because after those 100 texts, we are charged another quarter for every additional text, so our answer there is going to be A. All right, so as far as big things there, making sure that we're getting rid of answer choices as quickly as possible. You saw as soon as I noticed with C and D that they didn't have a straight line or a flat line going to 100, I got rid of them right away. That's something you want to do with any part of the SAT. Anytime you can get rid of a wrong answer choice, go ahead and get rid of it as soon as you know it's wrong. All right, question 3. Jake buys a bag of popcorn at a movie theater. He eats half the popcorn during the first 15 minutes. Okay, so the amount of popcorn in the bag then has to drop in the first 15 minutes. Let's check and make sure all of them do. We see D does not. D is wrong then. All right, moving on. We can go ahead and read a little bit more. After eating half the popcorn, he stops eating for the next 30 minutes. We need to go down and then have a flat line. We see we have that in option A. We see that we have that in option B. We see that we have that in option C, so that doesn't help us. Next thing. All right, next up we've got he gradually eats the popcorn until he accidentally spills all the remaining popcorn. Okay, so he gradually eats it, which means it'll look like this, and then he spills the remaining, which means we'll just have a straight line down. All right, so let's find which graph matches that. We see A is wrong because it goes up at the end, so we can get rid of A. Option B, it's looking like it's correct, and then we have option C. Option C sees us going up here. We know that we never increase, so our answer there is going to be wrong as well, and our correct answer will be B. All right, moving on, we got question number 4. All right, so question number 4, if 20 minus x equals 15, what's the value of 3x? All right, right here, we're just going to solve for x real quick. This one right here, you don't even have to necessarily move x if you don't want to. You can just think 20 minus what equals 15. You know 20 minus 5 equals 15, therefore x is going to equal 5. Okay, so that one's pretty easy. If you can ever see one that's real simple like that, then just go ahead and solve it like that. Otherwise, you would have had to, you could add x to each side and then subtract 15 from 20. So you'd have 20 minus 15 equals x. I'll rewrite that because that's kind of messy. Right, you would add x to each side, subtract 15 from each side. So then you'd have 20 minus 15. That's going to give you 5 equals x, right? So either way, you're going to end up with 5 as x. But keep in mind, once again, paying attention to what the end of the question is asking. It's asking for the value of 3x. Okay, so your answer is going to be 3 times 5, which is 15. Okay, 3 times 5, which is 15. Always pay attention to what your end of question is asking. Otherwise, you're going to end up missing points fairly often because there's it's fairly common on the SAT for them to put something like 3x or 3x plus 1 or something at the end after you solve for a variable. So you always got to pay attention to what you're asked at the end of the question. So answer for 4 is going to be C. All right, question 5. For the function f defined above, what is the value of f of -1? F of -1 just means we're plugging in -1 for x. So now we're going to have -1 plus 3 over 2. -1 plus 3 is going to give us 2 over 2, which we know is going to equal 1. Okay, so our correct answer there is going to be C. All right, for those ones you're going to want to get through pretty quick. Okay, most of the questions at the beginning of the SAT math sections, you're going to want to go through fairly fast because they get progressively harder as you go on through the multiple choice. Once you hit the free response, it gets a little bit easier, and then during the free response, it will get gradually harder throughout the free response as well. But that's more to do with pacing. I will talk about pacing all of the sections for the SAT in a later video in these 14-day SAT prep series. But for now, I'm just focused on teaching the tricks, tips, and sort of formulas and things like that that you need to know. All right, so question 6, which of the following is equivalent to 2x times x squared minus 3x? And if we take a look at our problems here, what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and distribute this 2x to that x squared and that negative 3x. So we got 2x times x squared. It's going to give us 2x cubed. 2x times negative 3x, that'll give us minus 6x squared. We just match our equation. We see D will be our answer for that one. So not too difficult there. Now, one thing that I would do, once I get that 2x cubed, I would just quick take a look at my answer choices and see if there's only one with that. Because if there was only one with that answer, I would know it was correct right away and wouldn't even have to solve for that minus 6x squared. But in this case, this problem is pretty simple, so I just went ahead and solved it all. If it was a more complex problem, then I would look to get rid of wrong answer choices and find one that was solely left. In this case, obviously there's two 2x cubes, so you'd have to solve for that next term anyways, though. All right, question 7. A retail company has 50 large stores located in different areas throughout a state. A researcher for the company believes that employee job satisfaction varies greatly from store to store. Which of the following sample methods is most appropriate to estimate the proportion of all employees of the company who are satisfied with their job? Okay, all employees of the company, that means we have to have more than one store included in the survey. So A is wrong because it says selecting one of the 50 stores at random. We need to select employees from all 50 since we're trying to come up with an appropriate proportion of all the employees at the whole company, which ranges across more than one store. Selecting 10 employees from each store at random and then surveying each employee selected. Yes, absolutely, that's the correct answer. Okay, that gives us people from each store and we're selecting them randomly, which allows us to come to an accurate conclusion about the employees at all the stores. Option C, surveying the 25 highest paid employees. Once again, that's a biased sample. And then 25 lowest paid employees also by a sample. D, creating a website on which employees can express their opinions and using the first 50 responses. Okay, this is called volunteer bias. Okay, so if you ever have a poll and you're only allowing people to volunteer to do it, you're going to get what's called volunteer bias. So you're not going to want to do that because that's going to be a biased survey then. So D is incorrect as well. All right, question 8. So we got total amount deposited on my y-axis. We got number of weeks on my x-axis. Anytime I'm given a graph, I want to pay attention to what my axes are labeled. I also want to watch out for something that's called, I believe it's called a split graph, or I think it's called a split graph, but where your x-axis or your y-axis doesn't start at 0. So always check and see if your x-axis starts at 0 because sometimes it doesn't start at 0. And if you think it starts at 0 and it doesn't, you're going to get into big problems when you try to answer questions. All right, so we got two graphs above showing total amounts of money Ian and Jeremy each have deposited into their savings account for the first 7 weeks after opening their accounts. After they made their initial deposits, how much more did Ian deposit each week than Jeremy? Okay, so that's the difference in their slopes, okay, because it's each week, which obviously is what their slopes are. So we got to find the difference in their slopes. So what I'm going to do here is I see that Ian, he increased his amount from $100 to $800. So that's an increase of $700. I see Jeremy, he went from $300 all the way up to $650. So that is an increase of $350. So since I'm taking the difference of their slopes, I can take the difference in their change in y and then just put it over the change in x since their change in x is the same. So I've got 700 minus 350, that's going to leave me with 350. I see that their change in x is 0 to 7 weeks, which is 7. So then I divide that 350 by 7, I divide that 350 by 7, and I'm going to end up getting 50 as my answer. Okay, so 50 will be the change or the difference between their slopes, which is the difference in how much they're depositing each week. All right, question 9. The function h is defined above. What is h of 5 minus h of 3? Once again, anytime that we have f of some number or any variable and then of some number, we're just putting that in for x. Right? So in this case, h of 5, we put in a 5. For x, 2 to the 5th, we know that 2 to the 5th is going to equal 32. Okay, 2 to the 5th will equal 32. And then h to the 3, that's going to be 2 to the 3rd. 2 to the 3rd is going to equal 8. We do 32 minus 8, that's going to leave us with 24 as our answer. Okay, so that one right there, not too bad at all. Just a thing to keep in mind, once again, paying attention to what we're asked to answer with, that's the value of h of 5 minus h of 3. So that's not too bad. Also, just one thing, if you really want to, this would be beneficial, but if you want to memorize what 2 to the 1st, 2 to the 2nd, 2 to the 3rd, 2 to the 4th, and 2 to the 5th are, as far as what they equal, I think that would also be beneficial for the SAT. It's not totally necessary, but it is something that could help you potentially. So up to you on that one. It's not really a huge deal, but just something I'd add in there. All right, question 10. A researcher surveyed a random sample of students from a large university about how often they see movies. Using the sample data, the researcher estimated that 23% of the students in the population saw a movie at least once per month. The margin of error for this estimation is 4%. Which of the following is the most appropriate conclusion about all the students in the university based on the given estimate and margin of error? Okay, right here I'm looking for something that's plus or minus that margin of error. So if I look at my options, I have A, it is unlikely that less than 23% of the students saw a movie at least once per month. No, that's not true. Right, we're looking for something that's going to use that margin per error. So I'd look for something with 23 plus 4% and then 23 minus 4%. Okay, so plus 4% would be 27%. And then minus 4% would be 19%. Okay, so with margin of error then, that range for the number of students or the percent of students who saw a movie at least once per month is going to be between that range of 27% and 19%. So I'm going to look for an answer choice that says something about that. And what I'm actually going to do here is I see I have 19 and 27% in these two answers. So I'm actually going to move on from B and I'm going to look at C. So I have the researcher is between 19% and 27% sure that most students see a movie at least once per month. No, that's incorrect, right? We have to apply that margin of error to that percent that initial percent that we got from the sampled data and what that's talking about. And that's talking about an estimate of the students in the population who saw a movie at least once per month. So therefore, it's plausible that the percentage of students who see a movie at least once per month is between 19% and 27%. That's the true statement here based on this data. Okay, so with margin of error, you're going to want to go plus the percent of the margin of error, and then you're also going to have to do minus percent of the margin of error. So with that, that's going to cover the math going through the problems for today. So now I'm going to play a couple tips and tricks for the math section, and then after that, we'll switch over to the SAT writing section. I have an SAT math tip/trick for you. So this tip and trick deals with correctly identifying one variable in terms of other variables. So if I look at question 3 here, I'm going to use question 3 to illustrate this tip and trick. So anytime that I glance at my answer choices and I see that I have one variable set equal to a bunch of other variables, so in this case we have E, O, and M, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and solve for that variable using the equation I'm given. Okay, so I can actually skip reading all of this up here. So I'll go ahead and exit out because I don't actually have to read that. So I know I don't have to read that because I see I have one variable, P, equal to all the other variables. So I know that I'm going to be asked a question such as this: which of the following correctly gives P in terms of E, O, and M? Now in order to find what P equals, I don't have to read anything in this box, right? So I exit out. I don't have to read any of that. If I read that, I'm wasting my time because all I have to do is solve for P. So to solve for P here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply each side by 6. Multiply each side by 6. Now I have 6E equals O plus 4M plus P. At that point, I subtract O from each side. I subtract 4M from each side, thus leaving me with P is equal to 6E. And then here, I'll write that bigger. P will equal 6E minus 0 and then minus 4M equals P, right? So my answer there would be A. Okay, so that saves you time because instead of reading this whole paragraph, you can quickly identify, I see that I have P equal to something in A through D. Therefore, I know I'm solving for P. I read my quick question at the end. It says to solve for P. So in that case, I multiply each side by 6, subtract O, and subtract 4M, thus giving me 6E minus O minus 4M. So my answer there will be A. So that's a trick you can use to save time because you're not going to have to read that full paragraph. In this paragraph, it's even a little bit smaller than some others. Some of them are even longer. Some of them might go all the way down to here. And if you're able to skip all of that by identifying that you just have to manipulate the variables, it'll save you a lot of time. And time is crucial on the SAT. So hopefully this tip was helpful. So here's an SAT math trick you can use to solve this problem. So it says, which of the following expressions is equivalent to x squared minus 2x minus 5 over x minus 3? Well, if we take our numerator, and let's call our numerator f of x. So let's say then f of x equals our numerator, which is x squared minus 2x minus 5. Well, then what we can do is if we call our denominator x minus a, we know then that f of whatever a is will give us our remainder over x minus 3. Okay, so whatever f of a equals, that's going to be our remainder. Now keep in mind our remainder has to be divided by that x minus 3 since that's what's in our denominator. But by doing this, we can find our answer really quickly because we see all of our remainders are different. So this will help us get to our answer really quickly. So we know that we're just going to be plugging in a for x in this equation, f of x. Now in this case, we know that our denominator is x minus 3, therefore a will be 3. So now we can just go ahead and solve. So now that you know this trick, watch how quickly I can solve this. I plug in, I'm just doing f of 3. That's going to equal 3 squared minus 2 times 3 minus 5. 3 squared is 9. 9 minus 2 times 3, that's going to be minus 6, and then minus 5. 9 minus 6 leaves me with 3. 3 minus 5 leaves me with negative 2. My only answer with this negative 2 here is going to be answer choice D, so D will be my answer. So notice how much quicker that was than actually writing out this full division problem right here. Okay, if I was to take the time and do that full division problem, that's going to take me a lot longer than that, about 30 seconds or less, that it took me to solve for what f of 3 was. Okay, so that's a little SAT math trick you can use to save time. So keep in mind that that's for when your numerator, you call your numerator f of x, and then in your denominator it has to be x minus a, and then a is the value that you're going to plug in for your x in that f of x to solve for your remainder. And that'll get you your remainder, but keep in mind you have to put your remainder then over your denominator, which in this case was x minus 3. So hopefully that was helpful and So for today's SAT writing practice, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through 2 passages from SAT Practice Test 10, and as I go through, I'm going to really show you what I look for on the SAT writing section because I'm really familiar with it and I've scored perfectly on the SAT writing section on back-to-back SATs. I'm going to show you what I look for as far as certain setups on questions and question types and things like that, so that way you can kind of get a good look and a good understanding of what you should be looking for when you're going through the SAT writing section. So as I go through, I'll answer each question, I'll give give answer explanations, and then I'll also kind of give you my tips and tricks and advice for the SAT writing section. And then once that is done, I'll also include a couple of videos that I made previously about SAT writing tips and tricks, and they'll be the ones that are more common to the SAT writing section that I think that you should definitely know for the SAT. So with that, let's go ahead and get started going through SAT Practice Test 10, the first two passages. So we got questions 1 through 11 are based on the following passage: how a cat in a hat changed children's education. In a 1954 Life magazine article, author John Hersey expressed concern that children in the United States were disengaged from learning how to read. Among other problems, Hersey noted, the reading material to grade schoolers had a hard time available to grade schoolers had a hard time competing with television, radio, and other media. Okay, this one right here is just checking to make sure that we understand that we should avoid redundancy and avoid repetition. Correct answer here is A. Okay, there's nothing wrong with this sentence. Obviously, that's what we would do for a list. I talked about it in one of my SAT writing tip videos, and maybe in day 1 or 2, I'm not sure. But we have television, radio, and other media. Okay, that's a list of 3 things. And when we have a list of 3 things like that, we want to separate the first 2 with a comma, and then have an and after that second comma, right? So the and is after the second comma. It's perfectly fine. So why wouldn't we say and with, or and also, or and competing with? Well, we already know that it's competing with television, radio, and other media. So saying competing with again would result in redundancy and repetition. And like I said in yesterday's video, we want to avoid repetition and redundancy at all costs. And then what about and also? Okay, once again, and also mean the same thing. So therefore that would be repetitive and redundant. Saying and with other media for children's attention, we already say with right here, that I'm boxing it, right? I'll put a star by it so you can see it. So once again, that would be repetition and redundancy. We always want to avoid repetition and redundancy, so correct answer there is A. One solution he proposed was to make children's books more interesting. Okay, now at this point, I see my prompt says that the writer wants to include a quotation by Hersey that supports the topic of the passage. Okay, so I want to know what the topic of my passage is. Which choice is best accomplishing this goal? Well, what we're talking about here is we're talking about how these children's books aren't interesting enough to attract children's attention. As a result, children aren't able to learn to read quite as well. So we're going to find something that supports that topic. All right, so we have children's books more interesting. Let's go ahead and start back at the beginning of the sentence so we have more context. We have one solution he proposed was to make children's books more interesting, since an individual's sense of wholeness follows cannot precede a sense of accomplishment. Okay, that one's off topic. Okay, so this one is wrong because it's really pretty much off topic. It's not talking about children reading and gaining their attention. So it's off topic, it's incorrect. B, interesting. Since learning starts with failure and the first failure is the beginning of education. Once again, it's off topic, right? We want to be talking about the cat in the hat eventually, right? And we want to be talking about how illustrations and capturing the audience's or the reader's attention is going to help these kids learn to read. So B is also wrong. Okay, even though it talks about education, it's not talking about how illustrations are going to help these children have more interest and therefore read more. C, interesting, because journalism allows its readers to witness history, fiction gives its readers the opportunity to live in it. Once again, off topic, we are not talking about history versus fiction here, so that's incorrect. D, interesting, with drawings like those of the wonderfully imaginative geniuses among children's illustrators. Yes, right, we know that our title of this story or this passage was the cat in the hat, and something about that we see in our next topic sentence that we have the cat in the hat. So we really want to talk about illustrations here. Okay, so answer there is going to be D. Now let's say that you didn't feel like you had enough of a understanding of the passage to answer this question, then all you do is you just move on. You'd read a little bit more and then come back to 2 when you have a better understanding what the topic of the passage is. So if you ever come across one of these questions and you don't know what the topic of the passage is yet, then just skip it, read on. Once you figure out the topic of the passage, go back and answer it. So that one right there is not too bad. All right, so the story of the Cat in the Hat's publication began when William Spalding, and then I see I have a comma here, the director of the education division at the publishing company Houghton Mifflin, and then I have a comma here. What that's telling me is that this is going to be a non-essential phrase or clause. And here's how I know it's a non-essential phrase or clause. Because I can take it out and the sentence still makes sense, right? So I have the story of the Cat in the Hat's publication began when William Spalding read Hersey's article and had an idea. Okay, so if I take off all the information between those 2 commas, the sentence still makes sense, therefore I know it's not essential. Another thing too is if I ever see a name and then a comma and then what the person does and an explanation of that, that's an indicator to me that it's probably going to be a non-essential clause. Okay, so that's another thing. So with non-essential clauses, as you know, we can use commas, dashes, or parentheses to pretty much offset that non-essential phrase or clause. In this case, we know we have to use a comma because that's what is used after the word Mifflin. Okay, so in this case, we know we have to have a comma after Spalding. We don't need a comma after director though, so C is incorrect. B doesn't have a comma. D uses a dash. We can't use a dash and a comma. They have to match, so it's got to be a comma with a comma or a dash with a dash or a parentheses with a parentheses. Therefore, our answer for 3 must be A. All right, next up we've got question 4. Okay, so we've got Spalding agreed that there was a need for appealing books for beginning readers. Okay, now I see I have the word he. Once again, we already said Spalding, so we know who we're talking about, so I don't want to use he there. So I don't want to use no change. That's going to be an incorrect answer, right? And obviously no change isn't even an option here. So we have which choice most effectively combines the sentences at the underlined portion. All right, so like I said, we already said Spalding, so I don't want to say Spalding again, so I know C is going to be wrong. The option of and meanwhile he, we don't want to say meanwhile after and because that's just wordy and we want to avoid being wordy. Remember how I talked about having concise word choice and being efficient, right? We don't want to say and meanwhile because that's inefficient and that's wordy, okay? So now between A and D, so we have a dash, namely he, or a comma, and he, right? So he agreed there was a need for appealing books for beginning readers, comma, and he thought he knew who should write one. All right, so that would make sense there. Our other option would be a dash, namely. Okay, once again, namely is not really helping us gain any information there. So that's just adding wordiness. So our answer for 4 then will be A. Okay, it's grammatically correct because it takes two independent clauses and separates them with a comma and a fanboy, also known as a coordinating conjunction. So that's grammatically correct by connecting those two independent clauses with that comma and the fanboy. Also, there's no wordiness involved. So answer there is going to be A. All right, he arranged to have dinner with Theodore Geisel, who wrote and illustrated children's books under the name Dr. Seuss, and issued him a challenge. Write me a story that first graders can't put down. All right, now we got 5. Having known Spalding for many years and maintained a professional relationship with him, we're asked for which choice best supports the information that follows in the sentence, so we have to read what follows in the sentence. Geisel was an experienced writer and illustrator, so we want to have an intro sentence that talks about him being an experienced writer and illustrator, which option A does not do. It talks about their relationship. Option B, acquired a reputation for perfectionism and for setting high standards for his work. No, not talking about him being experienced as an illustrator. C, been interested in politics before breaking into the genre of children's literature. Once again, not talking about his experience in literature, or I'm sorry, in illustration. And then option D, published 9 children's books and having 3 nominations for the prestigious Caldecott Medal. That's talking about him writing these children's books and illustrating them. So answer D is going to be our correct answer there. So anytime that you have a question that asks something about which choice best supports whatever follows, make sure that you read on for what follows before you try to answer it. Because if you try to answer it and you don't know what follows, you're just going to end up getting it wrong. All right, now we see I've got one word beginning of the sentence with a comma after it. That's always going to indicate to me I'm looking to transition between the previous sentence and the new sentence. Now, if I have that as my first sentence in a paragraph, for example, let's say that however with a comma was there, then I'm looking to transition from my previous paragraph to my new paragraph. In this case, I'm linking the previous sentence to the next sentence. So my previous sentence is talking about Spalding's Geisel's experience as a writer and illustrator. Now we have a transition here. Now what I'm not even going to do is I'm just not even going to read however. I'm just going to read the next sentence because I have to know my next sentence before I try to figure out what word should go there because I'm connecting the next sentence to that previous one back here with Geisel. All right, so we have this new project presented him with an obstacle. Okay, so we talk about how he's experienced. However, this new project is presenting him with an obstacle. That's contrast, so my answer there is going to be A because however is the contrast transition. All right, so if you ever have to contrast things, you're going to be looking for a transition such as however or in contrast. For example, does not contrast, furthermore does not contrast, and at any rate also does not contrast. So my answer there has to be A for number 6. All right, Spalding told Geisel to write his entire book using a restrictive vocabulary from an elementary school list of 348 words. Geisel started 2 stories only to abandon them when he found that he needed to use words that were not on the list. On the verge of giving up, okay, this right here, introductory modifier. How do I know that immediately? Because when I read on the verge of giving up, or if I read anything at the beginning of a sentence followed by a comma, immediately something that just is like a red flag to me, or not like a red flag in that it's wrong, but just a red flag in that I need to watch out for it, is that it's possibly an introductory modifier. In this case, it is an introductory modifier. On the verge of giving up, who is on the verge of giving up, right? You should ask yourself who or what or where or when following this introductory modifying clause, right? Who is it modifying? In this case, on the verge of giving up, that's going to be Geisel, not Geisel's story. So we know no change is wrong for 7. Not an image. It has to say Geisel. It has to be, as I talked about yesterday, the person that you're modifying, the modifier or the modifying clause or phrase has to be directly next to who it is modifying. In this case, it's Geisel, right? And the only option with Geisel is the first word is C, so I know C is going to be correct for number 7. All right, so anytime you see an introductory modifying clause, and you'll know that because it has a comma after it, it's at the beginning of a sentence, and you're asking yourself, who is that applied to, or where is that applied to, or something like that, that's going to be an indication. All right, so we have a cat wearing a battered stovepipe hat. His main character established, Geisel commenced the difficult task of writing a book with limited vocabulary. Okay, next thing I see is I have 8 at the end of a duration 9 months long. That's incredibly wordy and it's not going to be my correct answer. If we're going to say end of a duration 9 months long, 9 months long means the same thing, or it doesn't mean the same thing, but it means too similar of a thing to end of a duration. That's so wordy, it can be broken down to be way more concise, right? As I see in option D, 9 months later. That's the most efficient way to say this. Always look for the most efficient way to say things. Option B, after 36 weeks or 9 months, once again, and saying had passed, that's really repetitive. These two things are the same duration, right? It's just different units. It's unnecessary. C, after a length of 9 months has elapsed. Okay, saying after and elapsed, that's wordy. Also, saying a length of 9 months, you could just say 9 months. So in this case, 9 months later is the most efficient way to say it. D is the correct answer. Always look for the most efficient way to say things. Oftentimes that will be the shortest, but it doesn't have to be the shortest answer. Okay, so you can look for the shortest answer, but understand it doesn't always have to be, but that can be something if you're stuck. Look for the shortest answer, see if it makes sense, see if it's correct, but it doesn't have to be the shortest answer. All right, now we got the book was a hit. Children were entertained by its plot about the antics of a mischievous cat and is captivated by its eye-catching illustrations and memorable rhythms and rhymes. All right, so right here, we know that for 9, what we're going to want to do here is delete it, and here's why. I'll go ahead and explain this. So we've got children were entertained by its plot about the antics of a mischievous cat and, okay, we already have were entertained. So since we have were entertained, we want to maintain parallelism with entertained. Okay, we see entertained as a past tense verb. We see captivated, past tense verb. Okay, so since we have that past tense verb in both of those, we're going to look for a past tense verb. Now, is not a past tense verb. We don't want to use that. Was, once again, we don't need was, right? If we're going to use something here, I would look for the children were entertained by its plot about mischievous cat and captivated. It has to be captivated because we already have this were here. Okay, since we have were there, we don't need to have were or was there, or were or was. Here, I'll show you where I'm pointing. By this is, I'll put it in blue, right? Since we already have were up here, we don't need to have it where that is, right? So we're just going to remove it. We don't need anything there because we have the and right there, and then we just need our next verb in the past tense, which will be captivated. So we don't need to add anything there. Adding anything there would be a mistake. Answer there is going to be D, right? We don't want to add wordiness. We don't want to add words just to add them. Answer there is D. All right, its sales inspired another publishing company, Random House, to establish a series for early readers called Beginner Books, which featured works by Geisel and other writers, and other publishers quickly followed suit. And the years that followed, that has to have a comma after that. How do I know that immediately? Well, I know that immediately because in the years that followed is not a full sentence on its own. Okay, that'd be something like, it's like an introductory clause is what it looks like, right? In the years that followed, what happened? Okay, you can tell that it's not a full sentence because you're asking yourself what happened. There is no action there. There's no action, so you have to know what's happening, therefore not an independent clause on its own, in which case you have to have a comma. Okay, so in the years that followed, comma, many talented writers and illustrators of children's books imitated Geisel's formula of restricted vocabulary and whimsical artwork. Okay, so our answer for 10 is going to be C. We have to have that comma after that introductory clause because we're asking what followed. We don't know. We have to have that comma. Okay, we wouldn't use a dash after it. Anytime we have an introductory clause or phrase like that, we need to have a comma, not a dash. Semicolon, if you're going to use a semicolon, you need to have an independent clause before it, and in the years that followed is not an independent clause. And then we have option A, which I already told you is wrong because it's not an independent clause, right? It's not a full sentence before that period, so you can't use it. All right, so now we got, and just one thing as well, right? I'll put this in blue. Anytime that you see beginning of a sentence, or at the beginning of a sentence, you have a phrase like this. If it's something like in the years that followed or following that or anything like that, anything to do with time or in the years since, or maybe not in the years since. In the years since, I'm not sure about, but anytime that you have something like this in the years that followed, you're going to have a comma after it. Just understand that. All right, so we've got question 11. But perhaps the best proof of the Cat in the Hat's success is not its influence on other books, but it's we've got the writer wanting to conclude with a conclusion that restates the main themes of the passage. Which choice accomplishes this goal? All right, well, let's think what are the main themes of the passage. The main theme of the passage here is that the Cat in the Hat, it's had an enduring ability to delight children and engage them in learning to read, right? This whole passage is about how Geisel and the guy who wrote the book, The Cat in the Hat, they were able to work together and create this great book that not only were children delighted with and entertained with, but helped them learn to read. Okay, that's the big major theme. So in this sense, you would want to look at the big picture, even though it's not the reading section, since we're looking for the main theme of the passage, right? Look at that word right there. We talked about that yesterday with the reading section. It also applies to the writing section. The main theme is obviously the ability to entertain these children and get them learning to read. Okay, so we're going to look for a sentence that does that. Obviously, that's going to be C. I'll go ahead and explain why A, B, and D are wrong as well here quick though. All right, so we have A, no change. It's limited vocabulary and appealing word choices. That's not touching on the main theme. B, impressive worldwide sales continue to remain high to this day. Once again, that's not the major theme. D, important role in the history of illustration in the 20th century. Also not the theme. Okay, we want to focus on teaching children to read by entertaining them with these illustrations. All right, so that one, or that passage, we actually took a while on because I wanted to explain things a bit more in depth. For this passage, I'm going to go a little bit quicker because I just gave some pretty in-depth explanations that were slowed down. And this one, I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. I'm not going to rush through it or anything, but I'm probably going to give a little bit of faster paced explanations, and I'll pick it up a little bit. So with that, let's go and get started. We have keep student volunteering voluntary. A growing number of public schools in the United States require students to complete community service hours to graduate. Such volunteering, be it helping at a local animal shelter. Okay, this is going to be parallelism, I already know. Okay, because I see I have a list of 3. I've got verbs working, helping, which means I also have to have an ing verb here. Only ing verb there is going to be D. Okay, I talked about parallelism yesterday or the day before, right? Anytime that we see we have a list and there's verbs in the list, always look for parallelism. In this case, we see we have it with picking up, right? The ing verbs. So answer for number 12 is going to be D. All right, moving on. At a healthcare facility has obvious benefits for the community it serves and teaches students important life skills, but critics say that making volunteerism compulsory misses the point of the act. Okay, now I'm told that the writer wants a transition from the previous paragraph that highlights the criticism of compulsory volunteering mentioned in the previous paragraph, right? So we want to highlight the criticism of mandatory volunteering, which is going to accomplish this. So we have, by its very definition, volunteer work is willingly, okay? So that is critiquing or criticizing the forced volunteering, because it's saying that it's not volunteering if you're forcing someone to do it, because it's supposed to be you're doing it willingly. So A would be our correct answer for 13. I'll go ahead and show you why B through D are wrong as well here. So saying whatever the work may be, that's not, or volunteer work is done willingly, that's missing the point, okay? That's not criticizing forced volunteering because it doesn't mention anything about it being forced, right? It's just saying whatever the work may be. That's not helping us enforce this idea of criticizing this forced volunteering. For many students, once again, that's not critiquing that forced volunteering, right? We want to show that volunteer working is supposed to be done willingly, but it's not by having a compulsory or mandatory volunteering. And then D, fortunately for communities in need, once again, that's kind of off base here, right? Obviously, we are talking about volunteerism, but it's off base because we want it to support or criticize. We want to criticize this forced volunteering, and option D does not do that. All right, so we have by requiring students to do community service in order to graduate, school officials. Okay, one thing that I noticed right off the bat, officials doesn't own anything. There should be no apostrophe there. Are taking away students' choice. Okay, that's the correct. This is the correct students here, right? We need to have that apostrophe after the S. If it's before the S, we'd be talking about one student. We're talking about multiple. And it also has to have the apostrophe after the S, because it is the student's choice. They own that choice. It is possessive. Okay, so our correct answer here is going to be answer choice D. We want to have no apostrophe after official. We want to have plural students, apostrophe after it. Okay, so with questions like this, a big thing in understanding is just understand where you need to place the apostrophe. So make sure that you look at your nouns, check if your noun has an S in it. In this case, students is plural, so the S is part of that noun, so you have to have that apostrophe after it. Okay, the apostrophe needs to come after the S. All right, so answer choice is going to be D for number 14. We can go and move on a little bit. We've got making volunteerism less meaningful and pleasurable. According to a psychological concept called the reactance theory, the loss of freedom in choosing an activity can cause a negative reaction. For instance, instead of focusing on the good they are doing, students become resentful of the demands that compulsory volunteering places on their schedules. Proponents of compulsory volunteering who are in favor of it, that's redundant and repetitive. Anytime you see something redundant and repetitive, cross it out because you got to get rid of it. Once again, I see I have proponents here. If I say advocating it, that's also redundant. Once again, advocates here, that's redundant. Answer there's going to have to be C. Okay, avoiding repetition and redundancy at all costs. Once again, major theme on the SAT writing section. All right, moving on, we got point out that it allows young people to garner the benefits that volunteering offers. Students who volunteer report increased self-esteem, better relationship building skills, and, okay, those are 2 positive benefits. Okay, this third one better be a positive benefit, otherwise it's out of line. Okay, so our choices here, we have the question, which choice provides a supporting example that's most similar to those already in a sentence? It has to be something positive. We have increasingly busy schedules. No. Okay, that's not a positive. B, a closer connection with their community. Yes, that's a positive. Option C, less time spent engaging in social activity. Negative. A little increase in academic achievement. Also not a positive. Okay, only positive there's B. So anytime you're asked for something that is similar to other examples in a sentence or similar to other things contained in a paragraph, make sure that you're doing that. Okay, so if all the things are positive, your next one better be positive. If all the things are critiques or negative, make sure the next thing's also a critique or negative. Make sure you're matching the other examples when it asks you to. All right, next up, we have some studies have also found that students who do community service are more likely to volunteer as adults, and thus, okay, right here, this is a homophone question. I know that because obviously this is a common homophone, and I see all my other answer choices have that same root, right, the same effect sound. Now, in this case, we are looking for affect, right? These students are going to affect society, right? I talked about, or I don't know if I did talk about this yesterday, but affect is a verb and effect is a noun. Okay, so if I was talking about the impact something had on something, right? Or let's say that I said the effect of increased temperatures or something, right? In that case, that's a noun. Okay, if I said thus affect society positively, as in choice B, that's using it as a verb. Okay, in this case, affect is a verb. We're talking about how these students are making an impact on society. They are affecting society. So we wanted to use a verb there. Okay, so our correct answer there is going to be B, affect. Okay, we wouldn't say affects because we're talking about multiple. Students. Okay, so the students affect. Okay, if we're going to use one student, we would say student affects, but there are multiple, so we would say the students affect. All right, moving on. We've got question 18. However, most research looks at students who volunteer in general, not making a distinction between students who are required to volunteer and those who do it willingly. One recent study by Sarah E. Helms, assistant professor of economics at Stanford University in Birmingham, Alabama, did focus specifically on mandatory volunteering. Okay, mandatory, that's the correct word. Okay, we are talking about not forcible volunteering, though it is required. They aren't doing it forcibly, they're not physically making them do it. But it is required by these schools. It's mandatory. So that's the correct word choice there. It's not imperative, not coercive. Coercive would mean something like they're persuading them. They're just requiring them to do it, right? So correct answer there is A. That's just a word choice question dealing with diction there. Okay, she found that students who were required to volunteer rushed to complete their service hours in early high school. All right, next I see that I'm dealing with a question dealing on grammar because I have punctuation marks here and then a possible start of a sentence after that. I also see I have commas there and there. So really dealing with punctuation here. Okay, so they rushed to complete their service hours in early high school. That's an independent clause, so I could potentially have a period there, but if I look at my option with a period there, it has a comma after they. So it would say they, comma, then. That comma is not necessary and it's not allowed, so C is incorrect. If I'm looking at option A, we have in early high school, comma, they then did significantly less regular volunteer work in 12th grade. That's a run-on sentence because we don't have a comma with a coordinating conjunction, or we don't have a comma with a fanboy. So then obviously I have semicolons in B and D, but I have a comma after then, right? I have they, then, comma. We do not have a comma there. There shouldn't be a comma there. It's not allowed. Okay, it shouldn't be, there's just no reason to have a comma there. So it's just, it can't be there. So a correct answer then is going to be D for number 19. So sometimes in the SAT, they will put commas in random places. Don't freak out. Just say there doesn't need to be a comma there, therefore it's wrong. Just understand that. All right, so next up we got question 20. Did significantly less regular work in the 12th grade than, okay, this has to be, then did students who were not required to volunteer. Okay, and I'll show you why. B is going to be correct here. All right, in the beginning we talked about how students who were required to volunteer. Okay, so we have students who were required to volunteer. I'm going to highlight that. Students who were required to volunteer. Now we are comparing them and showing that they did significantly less regular volunteer work in 12th grade than, right, we have than right there. Than who? It has to be students who did not, or who were not required to volunteer. We got to maintain that parallelism, right? So our only option that does that we see is going to be B. We would have students who were not required to volunteer. So that would maintain that parallelism and that comparison there. So correct answer there is going to have to be B. Some people would think, oh, D is correct, saying compared with students, but we already are comparing them by saying that they did significantly less regular volunteer work, right? I'll highlight that as well. Okay. Since we're already comparing them, if we were to say compared with students, it would be redundant. So that would also be incorrect there. The correct answer there is going to be B. All right, now we got two questions left. Instead of requiring students to volunteer, schools have to do what, right? So in this case, we're told for which choice most effectively sets up the point made in the next sentence. Well, what's the next sentence? We have to read on. Anytime you're asked for something setting up something that is later on, make sure you read on before you try to answer it. Because if you try to answer it without reading on, you're answering it blind and you're going to get it wrong. So let's go ahead and move on. We got many students show that when schools simply tell students about opportunities for community service and connect them with organizations that need help, more students volunteer of their own free will. All right, so it's showing that schools should not be requiring their students to do volunteer work, but instead should just provide them with resources. All right, so we have instead of requiring students to volunteer, schools should do what? We have option A, have to recognize that all students are not equally well suited to the same activities. No. B, should allow students to spend their opportunities or their time participating in athletics and other activities. No. C, you should focus on offering arrangements that make volunteering an easy and attractive choice. Yes, that's what that next sentence is describing, so answer choice C is correct. D, are advised to recognize the limits of their ability to influence their students. No. Now keep in mind here, when I find the right answer, the only reason I'm reading the other answer choices is just so I can show you why they're wrong. On the real SAT, if I'm doing the SAT writing section and I find my correct answer choice, I'm not going to read the other answer choices until I go back and check my work, because there's no reason to. Once I find my right answer and I know for a fact it's my right answer, reading the other answer choices is wasting my time because I already know what the correct answer is. Now, that doesn't mean that at the end I don't go back and check my work. Once I've answered all the questions, I'll go back and I'll read some of those other answer choices just to make sure I'm 100% confident that I'm right. But if I see an answer choice and I know it's right, I'm going to go ahead and answer it and move on. That's just a side note I wanted to add there. All right, the writer wants a conclusion that states the main claim of the passage. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? Well, let's think big picture. What's the main claim in this passage? The main claim is that we shouldn't be requiring students to volunteer, but instead should be providing them with opportunities that they can explore on their own. So we're going to find an answer choice that says that. We have option A, it is imperative that schools do their part to find volunteers for many worthwhile organizations. No. D, schools that do this will produce more engaged, enthusiastic volunteers than schools that require volunteer work. I like this answer a lot. Now, in this case, I'm not 100% confident. Well, I am 100% confident, but let's say that you were not, because I want to give that example. Let's say that you were 90% confident this is the right answer, and you're doing fantastic on time, so you're not in a rush. If you're 90% confident, you're not in a rush, you're doing good on time, then at that point, if you really want to go ahead and read C and D, you can, right? But if you are 100% sure, I would just go ahead and answer it and move on. All right, so let's take a look at C and D. Studies in the field of psychology and economics have revolutionized researchers' understanding of volunteerism. Nope, that's not the main topic. D, it's important that students choose charitable work that suits their interests and values. Also not the topic. B is our correct answer. Right, so if you ever find yourself in a situation like that where you're 90 or 95% certain, but you don't know for sure, it's okay to go ahead and read on to these other two. But if you do find yourself and you're 100% sure on an answer choice, just go ahead and circle it and move on. Right, answer it and move on. So hopefully this was helpful for the SAT writing section. After this is done playing, which will probably be in about 10 or 15 seconds, what's going to happen is a couple of SAT writing tip and trick videos that I made are going to start playing. Those videos, watch those because they're going to show you tips and tricks for common questions on the SAT writing section that I think is very important to know. That's why I'm including them here, and that'll wrap up today's video. All right, so I have an SAT writing tip for you. So in this case, my writing tip is related to question 43. So this is going to be about matching tense and also matching your subject's number to your verb's number. Okay, so in this case, we're going to be working for question 43. So let me give you a little bit of context here. Grocery stores, convenience stores, and numerous other businesses have been able to thrive in their respective industries while paying significantly higher employee wages than their rivals. The success of these businesses highlight. Okay, now what I see here is I have a verb in the middle of my sentence. If I have a verb in the middle of my sentence underlined, I'm looking to do two things more than likely. The first thing that I'm looking to do is to match my subject's number. I want to match my subject's number to my verb's number. Okay, so I want to match my subject's number to my verb's number. Okay, so I want to make sure that my subject, if my subject's singular, I need my verb to be singular. If my subject is plural, I need my verb to be plural. And then the second thing I'm looking to do is match tense, right? I want it to be in the same tense. So those are the two things that I want to do. So in this case, I have the word highlight. Now keep in mind, I know since all of my other verbs here are highlight as well, I know I'm not dealing with a question about tone or about word choice. So since it's not a question about word choice and it's a verb underlined in the middle of a sentence, I want to make sure it matches the number of my subject and also matches the tense of the rest of my paragraph or the rest of my sentence. Okay, so in this case, I saw I had the verb thrive up here. I see that thrive is present tense, so I want to be in the present tense. Okay, so I know my tense then will be present tense. The next thing that I know is I need to match my subject's number to my verb's number. So I have my verb highlight. Now I need to identify the subject. So I have the success, and then I have of these businesses. Now, here's the big thing that's going to trick most people. They're going to think that their verb has to be plural because they see the word businesses next to it. Now, that's incorrect. Okay, your verb needs to be singular, but why? You need to understand the why here. Your subject is not businesses. Your subject is the success. Okay, and I'm actually going to put that in green so that way you can see that that is our subject. Okay, so I'm going to differentiate that from something else real quick. So the success, that right there is our subject. Now we know that the success, that's singular. Okay, so your subject is going to be singular and therefore your verb will have to be singular. Now, why is your subject not of these businesses? Well, of these businesses is a prepositional phrase, and when you're determining whether your subject is singular or plural, you have to ignore prepositional phrases. So you actually would cross out of these businesses. You'd see your subject is the success. You know the success is singular, therefore your verb highlight has to be a singular verb as well. Now, in determining whether it should be highlight or highlights, since we already know it's present tense, since it's present tense, we can get rid of would highlight and have highlighted because those both are not present tense. Right, so now we can go ahead and take a look at highlights versus highlight. Now, if we're going to use the singular version, which we are here since the success is singular, we would say he highlights, right? We'd say he highlights. That's what we'd say if we were in conversation, right? That matches our singular he to our singular verb highlights. Therefore, since we have singular the success, we need to have singular verb highlights. So our answer for 43 would be D. Now, if we had a plural subject, we would say they highlight, right? And that's a trick that you can use if you're ever unsure which form of a verb is singular versus plural, then go ahead and use he versus they, or you can use she. She works as well. But go ahead and use he or she and then they, right? If you would use the verb that you would use with they, that's going to be your plural verb, and the verb that you would use with he or she, that's going to be your singular verb. So that's a tip that you can use to help you identify whether or not a verb is singular versus a plural verb. So that's one thing that some people get confused on. And then the other thing that can trip you up is if you're not crossing out these prepositional phrases. When you're determining the subject, you want to cross out prepositional phrases. Now, things that indicate a prepositional phrase would be a word like of. Okay, when we see of these businesses right next to our subject, the success, we want to make sure that we're ignoring that prepositional phrase. So hopefully that was helpful. So hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. There'll be a donation link in the description as well if you would like to donate to me. As always, make sure to have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.